Gratitude has a way of quieting the noise around us and within us, creating space where clarity can finally emerge. In a world filled with constant demands, notifications, and expectations, many people are not lacking faith or effort, but stillness. When gratitude meets prayer in silence, something powerful happens. The heart softens, the mind slows, and we become more aware of God's gentle presence already at work in our lives. And welcome to Speaking from the Heart, folks. I'm Richard Fontanie, and I'm grateful you're here today. This podcast is a space where faith, life, and work meet in honest and practical ways. And today we're exploring how gratitude, prayer, and silence work together to bring clarity and help us listen for the God's voice within us. Now, before we go any further, I invite you to subscribe, follow, or share this podcast with someone who may need a moment of encouragement and reflection this week. Now let's move on to today's topic, gratitude and stillness, hearing God in the quiet of our daily lives. Scripture reminds us that God often speaks not in noise, but in stillness. A favorite psalm of mine, which I have quoted frequently, is Psalm 46. It tells us, "Be still and know that I am God." Now, stillness is not inactivity, it is an active presence. And gratitude prepares for that presence by shifting our focus from what is missing to what has already been given. When we approach prayer with gratitude, we are not demanding answers, but opening ourselves to guidance. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul writes in Philippians chapter 4, quote, "There is no need to worry, but if there is anything you need, pray for it, asking God for it with prayer and thanksgiving. And that peace of God, which is much greater than we can understand, will guard your hearts and your thoughts." End of quote. Notice the order. Thanksgiving is not an afterthought. It is part of the pathway to peace. Gratitude steadies the heart, making prayer less about control and more about trust. Silence is often uncomfortable because it reveals what we usually try to avoid. Yet silence is where clarity is born. When gratitude enters silence, it becomes a bridge rather than a barrier. Instead of replaying worries, we begin to notice grace. Instead of rehearsing fears, we recognize blessings. Now, this shift does not deny reality, but it reframes it through faith. In business and work, many people pray only when decisions feel urgent or overwhelming. Gratitude changes that dynamic. When leaders begin prayer by acknowledging progress, people, and what they have achieved and what they have received, anxiety loosens its grip. Clarity follows because gratitude reminds us that God has been faithful before and will be faithful again. Consider a business owner who felt paralyzed by uncertainty. Revenue was unpredictable and pressure was mounting. Each morning, instead of immediately asking God for solutions, he began listing 3 things he was grateful for in prayer. Now, over time, his perspective shifted. He became calmer, more patient, and more discerning. The clarity he sought did not arrive as a sudden answer, but as a steady confidence in the next right step. Jesus himself modeled gratitude in silence, and before feeding the multitudes, he gave thanks. Before choosing his disciples, he withdrew in prayer. Gratitude and silence were not separate practices for him. They were woven into his relationship with his Father. They anchored his actions in purpose rather than in pressure. There's one other thing about gratitude. It sharpens our ability to listen. When we are thankful, we are less defensive and more receptive. We stop bracing for disappointment and start opening ourselves up for grace. Now, this openness makes room for God's guidance to surface, sometimes through Scripture, sometimes through wise counsel, and sometimes through a quiet inner nudge. In the workplace, gratitude expressed through prayer can transform relationships. Praying with thankfulness for colleagues, even difficult ones, changes how we see them. It softens judgment and increases our empathy. Decisions made from this posture tend to reflect integrity, patience, and wisdom, rather than fear or ego. I remember an assistant of mine who nudged me toward a prayer of gratitude. Every morning we began the day with a prayer of thanksgiving and the grace to navigate the day's unfolding. It has been over 20 years since that time, but that experience taught me a lesson I will never forget. Silence does not mean God is absent. Often, God is most present in silence. Elijah discovered this when God spoke, not in the wind or the fire, but in a gentle whisper of the breeze. Gratitude trains us to notice whispers rather than shouts. It teaches us that clarity often comes subtly through peace rather than certainty. In daily life, gratitude and silence can be practiced in small moments, a quiet pause before starting work, a thankful prayer during a commute to a friend's place or to the grocery store, a few moments of stillness before bed rather than scrolling through the Instagram images. Now, these practices accumulate over time, shaping how we respond to stress, make decisions, and navigate relationships. One professional shared how ending each day with a gratitude prayer transformed her sleep and provided her with greater clarity. Instead of replaying worries, she reviewed moments of blessings she received from others. Her mind rested, and her mornings became calmer. Her problems did not disappear, but her capacity to face them grew exponentially. And gratitude also aligns us with universal values that transcend belief systems: humility, compassion, patience, and trust. Now, these values are reinforced through prayer and silence. They guide behavior in business, work, and in life, creating a consistency between what we believe and how we act. Now, as you reflect today, consider these questions. Where might gratitude soften your prayers? What noise might you need to release to hear God more closely? How could silence become a place of trust rather than a place of discomfort? Now, these are not questions to rush. They are they are invitations to sit quietly and to listen. The invitation to action this week is simple and intentional. Set aside 5 minutes each day for a silent prayer of gratitude. Begin by thanking God for what is already present. Sit quietly and listen without forcing answers. Notice what arises: peace, insight, or reassurance. And trust that clarity often grows quietly like a mustard seed. Gratitude through prayer and silence does not promise instant solutions, but it cultivates discernment. It anchors us in faith. Steadiness steadies our emotions and opens us to God's guidance. In a world that values speed and certainty, gratitude fosters trust, and in that trust, clarity is born. Now, thank you for joining me today. Let's meet again next week when we will take a deep dive into endurance as a spiritual discipline. Bye now.